They were never alone, not for a single night, and nobody wanted to admit it. But something had been watching them for years, silently, patiently, waiting for the moment when everything would unravel, when the line between safety and terror would finally break, and the world would realize that the shadows in their own homes were not empty. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. A faint tapping on the windows at 3 in the morning, the soft scrape of footsteps in hallways no one had walked through, the inexplicable feeling of eyes burning into their backs when they were sure the house was empty. You convince yourself it's nothing, a trick of the mind, a creaking floorboard, a storm rattling against the walls. But then the smell comes, something metallic, like rust mixed with something far older, something alive. And you notice how the air itself seems to thicken around you, the way the light bends unnaturally at the edges of rooms, how the darkness lingers longer than it should, clinging to corners, watching, waiting. They didn't know when it began. Maybe it was the first night the baby cried for no reason at all. Maybe it was the night the dog refused to enter the living room, its fur bristling, hackles raised, a low growl that seemed to hum through the floorboards themselves. They didn't know that the eyes in the dark had names, had patterns, had a patience honed over decades, because humans rarely notice when something waits. They only notice when it acts. And act it did, in ways so small, so subtle, that years passed before anyone realized the pattern, before anyone could truly see it. Things would go missing, a knife, a set of keys, a photograph, each replaced by something almost identical but slightly wrong. Sometimes the photographs showed faces that weren't there before, shadows twisted into shapes that made your stomach tighten, hearts lurch in your chest. Sometimes you would feel it in the bed, lying just behind you, the heat of its breath brushing your neck, the slow, methodical rhythm of its gaze that promised understanding, attention, possession. They tried to leave. Some of them did. But the roads themselves seemed to fold back into the town, the paths to safety curling into alleys they had never walked, doors opening into rooms they didn't recognize, hallways stretching longer than physics should allow. And those who stayed began to notice the patterns. The same car always parked 2 blocks away, empty but for a single silhouette in the driver's seat. The low, barely audible hum that rises before a window shatters or a mirror cracks. The whispers in voices that should not exist, soft and deliberate, calling names no one alive should remember. Time began to bend. Days blurred into nights, nights into days, and no one could tell when one ended and the other began. And yet life continued, because you cannot live in fear forever. You convince yourself it isn't there, that it's fiction, that it is just imagination. Until it isn't. Until you are walking home and notice your reflection lagging behind in the glass, moving when you do not. Until you wake to the sound of breathing, shallow, ragged, not your own, close enough to count every exhale. Until the walls themselves seem to pulse, as though alive, reacting to your thoughts, your movements, your very intentions. And that's when they came forward, almost shyly at first, testing, learning, marking, until the moment they struck was inevitable, inescapable, carved into every minute leading up to it. One by one, people vanished. No struggle, no screams, only the quietest interruption of normal life, like a page torn from a book you didn't know you were reading. Friends and family searched, but the air around the vanished was empty, as though nothing had ever been there. Sometimes, weeks later, a clue would appear. A footprint that didn't match anyone alive, A scrap of paper with symbols no one could read. A photograph of someone smiling, eyes wide with terror, though no one remembered the moment it was taken. And then, the survivors realized the truth, the one that makes every rational thought twist into madness. It was not random. It was waiting, watching, learning, and it was patient beyond comprehension. It had been preparing, choosing its moment with precision that no human could hope to anticipate. And when it acted, it left behind not chaos, but inevitability, a sense that you had always known it was coming, that every glance over your shoulder, every shadow you ignored, every small shiver was just part of the countdown. The final night came without warning, though it had been in preparation for decades, unnoticed. They were all gathered, the last few who had understood the pattern, the few who had survived the subtle horrors of years. And they felt the room shrink, the temperature drop, the shadows deepening into forms that seemed to breathe and shift with intention. The lights flickered, then died, plunging them into a darkness that was not natural, that seemed to press against their skin, their lungs, their thoughts, bending the very air into shapes of fear. Then came the sound. A chorus of whispers, overlapping, impossible to decipher, rising to a crescendo that made the walls hum, the floor shiver, the very foundations of the house vibrate in terror. And when the lights returned, they were gone, all of them, except for one. The lone witness, the one who would tell the story, or try to. But as they stumbled toward the door, heart pounding, the air heavy with anticipation and dread, they realized something far worse than disappearance. The thing that had watched them for years was not gone. It had taken the forms of those who were missing, standing silently in the corners, staring, waiting, eyes bright, smiles too wide, gestures eerily familiar but wrong in subtle ways that made the skin crawl. And then, the final, unbearable revelation sank in. It had never just been watching. It had been learning to be them, to become them, to replace them entirely. And when they looked in the mirror, alone in the dark hallway, it was not their own face they saw staring back. It was too late. They were already inside.